Three. How's it going? This is Wilsfer with Abysmal Hymns, and I am back with Lard, who's returned from their travels. And today we're going to bring you Jesus versus Bigfoot. It's not going to be a steel cage match because I think that would be a little one-sided. Since Jesus was probably like 5'4" and weighed 120 pounds against 8 foot Bigfoot. So that wouldn't be necessarily a fair fight. But so we're gonna go for who has the most legitimacy, who has most proof of life. Um, so that'll be interesting. Uh, it- you know,
Blasphemy!
it's hard to say. I was gonna say, well, Jesus has a lengthy history, but there's
And so does
some
Bigfoot.
Bigfoots on cave paintings. So, I mean, then it's like how far back did the ancient Indians go? And that's the thing. Like every culture has a solar phallic deity, just like every culture has a hairy wild man. So these are obviously two archetypes that are very important.
Yeah.
So, what's your initial thoughts on this matchup, Lloyd?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back, everyone. I'm Lard of Lard Labs. So this is an exciting topic for me because I recently, well, by recently, like in the last year or so, have been doing my own deep dive into the Bible. And it's brought me to just some really interesting revelations in my own work. So, and then I recently on my blog dropped an essay called Blasphemy that because I know people are going to get angry for reading it. That's why I called it that. So when you suggested this topic, I was like, perfect. It's right on brand. Um, but yeah, Jesus versus Bigfoot is a hard one because it seems on the surface level that it should be easy, like, oh, obviously Jesus. But based on my own research, first of all, Jesus is that the name is fourth removed because in his time he spoke Aramaic, so he was known as Ishu. So there's conspiracies in that. First of all, of like, where did this Jesus figure come from if the actual person is named Ishu? And then the Jesus that we supposedly, his teachings that we follow today, there's this break in modern day Christianity between like, I don't know if it's fringe anymore, it's starting to be mainstream, where there's a whole group or sect of Christians that don't even believe we follow the teachings of Jesus, that we actually follow Paul, who, when Jesus was alive, didn't believe in Jesus. So it makes you start to wonder, is Jesus even real? Which brings us to that realm of Bigfoot, and then from that sense, it becomes pretty even in terms of, hmm.
Oh, here's the thing too with Bigfoot, where Bigfoot gives Jesus a handicap, is Bigfoot has the benefit and the doubt of science. So there's more DNA being picked up. And I think the numbers that I got from the Center for Bigfoot Research were reporting that there were 75,000 Bigfoot sightings. Only 6,000 of those proved to be legitimate.
Okay.
Now, so it's kind of like, I was thinking if we were to take this from an academic perspective, if you're writing a dissertation on Bigfoot or Jesus, then you got to cite your sources, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think some of these, so then when we get into the 6,000, it's kind of like aliens also play into, by aliens, will include UFOs, of where we have, because I mean, I think that they're pretty much synonymous for me. Bigfoot and aliens that's like saying I'd like to speak to the manager when you're at McDonald's and they send out the fry cook. Well, that's probably Bigfoot. Um, but when we think about that, then we've having Senate subcommittee hearings on UFOs. Then now they're not Senate subcommittee hearings on Bigfoot just because Bigfoot is not likely a national security threat since
There's one
they're
of him.
not
Yeah,
outmaneuvering, yeah,
technology.
their technology. And there's not a lot to gain. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe in the fitness world, if we got some Bigfoot
Drop
uh
lifters,
protein, yeah, then we could, have some
and we can argue about that.
Bigfoot mass builders. That could be all right. Um, so yeah, so it's always where the money is where the most, I mean, even in any type of academic endeavors, if you're looking at getting grants, they tend to write those for, they're always backed by some sort of medical company or somebody who's down the line connected to the military industrial complex. So that Bigfoot doesn't get a lot of that.
No, I mean maybe stealth credit, but
Yeah, some camo. They could invest in Bigfoot camo. That would be.
yeah,
But maybe that's because we're not, it doesn't affect the regions. We're not like trying to invade the Pacific Northwest. We're,
true. It's outdated warfare anyway.
right,
It wouldn't really be practical for these modern times.
right. So yeah, so they're the numbers. So then if you look at, well, so firsthand sightings of Jesus, I think that his post-death resurrection numbers, I think he was really only packing in crowds where they said there's 500 people saw him, where if you look at,
Mhm.
well, those are, they're in Florence, Italy in 1954, 10,000 people saw a UFO. So yeah, that's
Ah,
um
your logic is so sound; it makes me uncomfortable the best way possible. Um,
because so we're just looking at the numbers. I think that there are definitely other layers to it. And the Bible, when we say Jesus, we always think it's synonymous with the Bible. Um, I know from a lot of sources where people are, saying, well, the Bible could be traced back to all these other writers, and then that plays into, like you were talking about Paul. Most of the people that he interviewed that had firsthand encounters with Jesus, it was 20 years after he died. So
yeah, it's very removed. I
yeah,
mean,
so that would mean that they would be at the very least 53 years old, which for those times was pretty ancient.
yeah,
The life expect I mean, if we get outside of the alien DNA that was in the people in the Old Testament, where they had like the Methuselahs that were, living 500 years when they had a lot of Elohim, um, probably DNA in their genes still from that, because I mean it hadn't been that long since the giants among men were breeding with the daughters of Adam, as they would say. And funny enough, I've heard a theory that Bigfoot could have been related to the Elohim.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah.
Like, is Bigfoot the miniaturized version, and that's why they're hiding in the wilderness? You know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of it. And then we get into, if we even, and I don't think the supernatural elements should be excluded because I think that that's just science that we haven't gotten a good grasp on yet, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. So, you could say the same thing about Jesus if it's post-resurrection, then are we dealing with a zombie, a lich, a what kind of undead creature is he? He's definitely, you enter the realm of the supernatural once you like come
Yeah.
back from death. Because then he had a lot of powers at that point. Um, I've heard it was interesting. It was on the Danny Jones podcast. They were talking about, that there was a mage that was referred to as Jesus. So, and the term, I'm sure we both heard um, them talking about the term Christ really means the christener. So somebody that
Uh,
christens.
right. Yeah, that
Um,
you get into the semantics of words and definitions, it gets even fuzzier because there's a whole. I was reading about it, there's a whole sect um, in like alternate history or fringe, whatever you want to call it, from India that believed Jesus was actually stolen because it's Ishu from Krishna, and it was Ishu Krishna became Jesus Christ.
right. And, I
So
mean, Bigfoot has a similar problem where then we're talking about, we've got what is it, the Yowies in Australia. We've got the Getty in Nepal. We've got the abominable snowman, which is, pretty. Abominable snowman is kind of like the,
I think Disney. Sorry.
yeah, the commercialized Yeti. Um,
um, and you know what? You haven't even tapped into yet the whole interdimensional angle in terms
Well,
of
there's a little bit of that when you get into saying that he's the fry cook for the aliens.
yeah.
Um, and where, I mean, maybe they both are, that think that, it's interesting when you think about even the wise men that were following a star, um,
Right.
to a point where, and, angels said to the wise men, don't be afraid when they appeared to tell him about Jesus, which
Uh-huh.
is the number one thing that aliens always say as soon as they abduct somebody is don't be afraid. So,
Ooh.
um, yeah, so there's some crossover there. I mean, maybe the two are related. Um, I don't know, but Jesus had little feet, so that changes things a little bit.
Also, and I'm not aware of this, but I'm sure you are. So, like in the traditional sect of Christianity, the Jesus lovers, they're all vegetarian. What about Bigfoot?
Yeah, there's been multiple versions of that. You have to think about, well, what's the Yeti eating? Because that changes with climate, you know.
Okay, fair.
There are speculations that Bigfoot could be a vegetarian because he's eating grass and berries, but he's also seen near streams and lakes and bodies of water. So maybe that's because he's doing a bear and just grabbing fish out of the water.
There was a point to why I brought up diet, but as soon as I asked it, it like disappeared.
Just like Bigfoot. So the funny thing is, so we were originally going to record this episode on Christmas, but
Right.
the internet net went down for no explanation.
Blasphemy.
They came out here and said that it was because the Ethernet cables were dirty when they installed it. Sounds
That's
suspicious to me.
very
Maybe
suspicious.
they could have sent government agents over here to, tap my internet wires, and that was the whole thing was a ruse. But um,
Yes, God forbid we draw a connection between Jesus and Bigfoot, and
well, I've heard because at the Bigfoot convention last year, somebody asked one of the presenters, why is it that the government just won't come out and release the Bigfoot files with the Freedom of Information Act? Um, and why keep it a secret? What's the danger? And they said, it's more about suppression of creative thought. That if you can think out of the box and think about
okay, that's fair.
there's a big monkey walking around who may or may not be interdimensional, um, Because then that'll raise questions. Well, why is Bigfoot always blurry? How probably people say he
Mm,
just disappears. Um,
that's a valid point of creative thought. Yeah, because if you can think for yourself, you can't be
yeah, it's
lost.
like either the options are accept the narrative or not.
Right,
If
right.
not, then you're the other, and we got to keep a file on you too. So, um,
I wonder how many files are on me.
yeah, I would say they probably have about three. I think, there's probably because, it's different departments. Once you get into opening portals with volcanoes, that probably gets
Sure.
handed over to a different department than just someone who is, being um transformed by alternate entities, which that's
Yeah,
another department. The minute that you probably started talking to church people, they probably made a different file. That's probably in the Vatican files. Um, because then they have to keep an eye on that. It's like, well, who
right, right.
is
Who's tapped
in
into the
here asking
info?
questions?
Right. Because
And
actually, sorry to interrupt, but I'm going back to your convention. Creative thought, I hadn't considered that, but yeah, absolutely. Thinking outside the box or the fact, accepting that there are no boxes. But I think if people also understood that we are living in a simulation and interdimensional travel is just, I mean, I would say Bigfoot is proof of that as he sort of like, as you flash in and out,
yeah.
what that totally changes the sphere of what is possible if you can just kind of hop in and out from place to place. Time
Right.
change.
And I think that too, it kind of factors in if you think about it as like the biblical allegory of the Tower of Babel. In that story, they said if we let them build a tower to heaven, then I don't think the danger was that they were going to reach it. Although the God in that story said, well, if they put their minds together, they can do anything. So that's why we have to keep them separated so they're all speaking different languages. And
Right.
like we've talked about this before at the Bigfoot convention, even that subcategory of people, if you want to call them that were gathered there were divided into two groups. There were the apers, which thought that Bigfoot's an ape in the woods.
Hmm.
And then there were the more esoteric minded people. And the apers were calling the esoteric minded people that, the Bigfoot's an alien or some paranormal.
Hmm.
They were calling them crazy and saying, well, crazy people, they just like to connect the dots to anything to make it make sense. And the guy said, well, the last time I checked, we're both at a Bigfoot convention.
Yeah,
So,
it's awesome. Hierarchy exists everywhere.
right. So, yeah, so in any type of people getting together to agree on anything, that's too much.
It's so interesting,
And
actually.
just think about it with church. Church is like that too. I mean, why is
Oh
there?
yeah,
We got Presbyterians, we got Episcopalians, we got, I mean, we couldn't even have an entire episode where we just rambled off different denominations of churches and just think of all the things that is splintered from that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, you know, Similar to even the concept of Bigfoot being split up into so many different terms, you know. So are we saying the Yeti's real, but skunk apes aren't? Are we saying, what is when they could be every culture expressing one thing? Same thing with Jesus. Every culture expressing one thing, because if we think about all of the savior myths, um, which bleed over into the sun god myths, um, you've got every religion has one. What's a religion without? that figure.
That's an interesting challenge that you've just given me.
I mean, even the first church of Bigfoot has Bigfoot, so it's,
Is there a Church of Nothing? Church of Void?
I mean, the closest thing I can think of it is this Church of Subgenius, but even they have Bob Dobbs. Um,
True. So if I did a Church of Void, there'd still be lard.
yeah,
So how can you
but
escape yourself? I mean, I guess, and even with AI as a stand-in, there's still a thing. My brain.
but even with AI, and here's where I've heard with AI is um that AI is the Antichrist because it can't create like humans can create from nothing. It has to take something and create based off of that.
That's interesting because
Rather
in
than
book,
what's in it, like, okay, just make me a picture of something that you came up with.
yeah, but see,
Like we could do that. We could create, okay, well, this is my picture of the Boo Boo a latte, which, would be some type of, you know, creature. It could look like an angel. It could look like a Labubu. It could look like the girl in the Starbucks cup. I don't know. Um,
oh man, but you realize you just opened up a whole other can of worms because in my own work when I was in PhD land studying Plato, he made the whole argument that artists are at the bottom of the totem pole because we are only capable of copying what already is, and why would anybody want a picture of something when they could have like the actual chair to sit in? So your whole argument that AI is the antichrist because they can't create something out of nothing but humans do. But are we really creating of nothing? Or are we recreating what already is?
well, I mean, we made a chair. Where's the
That's
first
yeah.
blueprint on the chair? Before the chair, there was rocks.
Which
We went
so are
from
they quite different though,
sitting
other than shape? You know,
form and
like
function. I mean, chairs have evolved over the years, so we have to think about the earliest chair. What was that, a
the
log?
ground, the ground.
Yeah, but something to keep us off the ground.
Okay, a log, a rock.
A
Yeah,
log, yes, those logs. So then logs, and this would be interesting. What came first, logs, benches, or chairs, stools?
stump,
Where did that come in?
stump.
Dump.
Like a broken tree, a stump.
Oh, stump. Yeah, stump. So then, but we weren't trying to recreate a stump because the stump would be rooted in the ground. So we needed like a more
Well, recreate a
portable.
stump that's mobile.
Yeah,
And
so
log.
we
Then over
mobilized the
time, the
stump,
log is
but we
like
needed the stump to be
decays.
more. It was taking up too much room.
Right, it has to be more
You couldn't pull
comfortable.
your stump up to the table. You know. So when did that come in?
Oh man! But where did the table come in? And there was a
Worst.
table
Well, it's kind of
before.
like that Metallica song, "I Am the Table." Um, they did with
Oh.
Lou Reed, where he just yells, "I am the table." So maybe the table is a state of being.
But see, it's a rabbit hole, round and round and round. Point
Right.
I was trying to get at. Um,
I mean, I
yeah.
don't know. Plato could have been working for the simulation himself. Could have been just an NPC, and his concepts were, "Welcome, fellow traveler. Come look at my wares."
Well, I mean, the perfect state was all about creating the perfect program.
Right.
And now we are essentially living a program. So that to me makes, like those dots make sense. Um,
But even state, you think of state as in state could be a location, state is an organization of territory, or state is a mental parameter.
right.
Like an
Semantic.
altered state would be different than the United States.
Yep, going back to defining our terms.
Right. So then the terms of, so that's where we get into Jesus. It's like the defining the terms of that. So is it like a state of Christ? You're in a Christ, because we've heard the term Christ mind.
Yeah, you made a valid point now that let me do a little Google search. Has there been any
Where I
or
haven't really heard of a Bigfoot state. So I entered a Bigfoot state. Now, would they be talking about they got lost in the woods, they gained some weight, they bulked up? I don't know.
well, no, so you bring up a good point, which goes back to the other thing in terms of Bigfoot sightings. I was wondering, and I just did a Google search, has there been any modern day sightings of Jesus?
Well, he's appeared in toast. Um, so that, it's always like toast, coffee grounds,
Right, right,
the
right.
sky. A lot
The
of, well,
image
it's
of
been in
him.
more altered states. Um, a lot of people, say that he appears in visions to them.
So, in
But
terms of what
then,
you
or
see
yeah, so then it's
versus
like
Bigfoot, like you're hiking in the woods and you see Bigfoot, are you altered, or is he, like, is it a double look? Whereas Jesus in toast, you know what I'm
Jesus
saying?
within tow, but see, so then we're having the imprint of something. So then it becomes what's conscious and what's subconscious, what is concrete, where Bigfoot is leaving indentions in the ground. So we have that something has mass and weight to do that,
Mhm, mhm.
where Jesus is a spirit or an energy, it's just imprinting on the toast. So that doesn't imply mass and weight. That's more of an alchemical change. So then we get into what is real. And so then are we looking for somebody that's just defined by energy or somebody that's defined by mass?
But it goes back to, do we know that's Jesus, or is it just a picture of? Like, is it a crazy
Right.
spirit who's an
It could,
artist?
yeah, or it could be a demon that's impersonating Jesus
We don't really know
because
from
it
that standpoint.
knows that that's a popular figure that a lot of people trust.
It becomes a
And
symbol.
yeah, so which could be some type of energy being that's also inhibiting AI. I don't know at that point in time. It could, 'cause then we get into cosmic energies, which, it's interesting because me and Shoshana just had this talk kind of when we were discussing the link between demons and trauma. And she was saying, well, it's all real. You have to say if it's all real, because if it's real to that person and that's their experience, then it's real.
Mm.
Um, so I think that we're trying to find something as a physical entity, proof of life. Um, because a spirit just would not be proof of life because it's more of an energy rather than
A
something that's taking
frequency.
on, yeah, a physical form.
And yeah, how could we
Because
argue?
then a frequency, then we're saying the microwave is alive at that point because it's emitting microwaves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, geez, it seems
It's a
like
lot.
Bigfoot is winning.
Yeah, I think Bigfoot might take this. Just if we're basing it off of who do we have the most fecal samples of? Um, you know, now the shit of Christ, that would be pretty impressive.
It would
And
probably
maybe
go
the
for
Vatican's holding on to it and they don't want to. What is that being that's coming? Do you see that when I like lean this way? There's like some type of entity behind me. Um,
wait, do it again. Do it again. No, you disappeared.
Yeah, it just came up. There was something that was right here. Maybe it was a Christ poop. I don't know. Um,
A chimpanzee zebra, maybe.
yeah, well, they have mass and weight, so we've defined them. Um, but yeah, so there's a lot to ponder here. We're going to say that just for the sake of having a conclusive proof of some type of a win or a loss, so we don't leave this as a tie, which I feel that would be a cop out, is if you have fecal samples, you have hair samples. The Shroud of Turin apparently had some DNA, but it was very inconclusive. A lot of the Bigfoot DNA is inconclusive, but at least they're narrowing it into a mammalian being of some kind where, the readings on the Shroud of Turin came up with it was an expulsion of energy.
Interesting, which could go back to the whole idea that it's a demon that's graffitiing Jesus's symbol
That's
everywhere.
its tag. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we really need some Jesus poop. If you have any, please comment
Send a
below.
sample
Yes.
to Wilsifer, though. I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't need the sample, but I just need, we need some proof of life here. Because, you know, as it's said, shit lives forever. So I don't, and maybe that's what they're meaning when they say they give you everlasting life. It's all about the vowels at that point. I don't know, but you heard it here. I think we're on to some things. There's a lot of deeper topics that we could explore, and we will get back to you guys with those at some point in time. And we'll have to catch up with Lard and really get an update on their travels. So check back with us for that as well. And so like and subscribe and do all that stuff that you do on the internet. Um, you know, maybe on the toilet as you're having a moment with Christ.